Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of Tech Motoring. Today we are going to be going over my first month with solar. So as the title suggests, the good, the bad, and the unexpected. So get ready for this. Now if you haven't seen the original video that I posted about a month ago, you can click that little link up there and that'll bring you to it. That just shows a quick time-lapse video of the actual installation for my house, or at least half of the installation that you can see. So that's pretty cool if you want to take a look at that. And if solar is something you're interested in or something that you already have, go ahead and hit that subscribe button below too. I'll be doing a lot of videos in the future about this, and maybe it's something that you can have an interest in and possibly even just compare your results to mine. So stay tuned, we'll be right back at it. Welcome back everybody, and like I was saying before, the good, the bad, and the unexpected for solar. So just to kind of start the process here, I'm going to do a quick PowerPoint presentation on everything, and I'll be going through all the ins and outs of my experience with solar since we've started it. We have basically the entire month of July. We were missing about the first 6 days of July of actual production with solar. But we're also going to look at the cost of the solar. We're going to look at the production that the solar gave me. We're also going to look at the different types of electricity providers that are out there, the different types of ways that they will reimburse you for excess solar that you produce. So let's get started on this right away. So like I was saying before, the good, the bad, the unexpected is because there is a lot of unexpected that people don't realize off the bat. And once again, here in the state of South Carolina, these rules and these laws will change potentially over time. You also have to keep in mind that your state might be different when it comes to doing solar. So keep that in mind for when we go through this, and I'll bring up the differences that other states may have for this. Kind of started off, we're going to go over my solar equipment. Now this was something that I had researched heavily before deciding to do solar. We looked into the types of different panels, the different manufacturers, the different warranties on those panels, the size of the panel, meaning not only the physical size, but also how many watts that each panel produces. That makes a big difference, because if you get a panel that produces more wattage, you'll need less panels. So that is always something to look into when you start doing solar. Now, they are more expensive the higher up in the wattage panels that you go. However, if you're ever going to expand your system, you want to have as few of the panels as possible to start, because in the future you may need to expand with a couple extra panels depending on your needs. So to start, my system is a 5.92 kilowatt hour system. Now that number may not mean anything to you right now, but as we go further into this you'll understand. So how I produce that number is we take 16 panels, 370 watts per panel. So that basically means that if you take 370, multiply that by 16, you get 5.92 kilowatt hours, or 5,920 watt hours, just to kind of give you an easy translation there. Now, as you can see here, the traditional solar panel, or the ones that you may be used to seeing, are the ones that are on the left there, and that they show that, you know, they obviously are the typical type of panel with the silver lines going through them and the dots on them, and that's what they call the bus bars, those lines that are going down there. Now the reason I went with Solaria branded panels was specifically because not only do they look better, as you can see from the picture, they are just all black, and that's not an exaggerated picture, they do look completely black. And there's a different type of technology that they use versus the bus bar technology that you would normally see in traditional solar panels. And I'm not going to go deep into this because you could do the research yourself when you're ready. I recommend Solaria. That was just what I went with because I liked what they were doing with the panels. But the idea is that for the same size panel as your other branded panels, you can make about 10% more power because of the extra space that the panel gives you to produce power, whereas the traditional older panels have those gaps that are just less space that you could be using for power. And of course, we're using 16 micro inverters by Enphase. And what this means is that every single panel has an inverter. When the panels produce power, they are producing DC power, which you may know from your standard battery or what your car would use, and it has to convert that into AC power. So the inverters take that power from the panels and immediately, right below the panel, converts it into AC power, which then runs down into a box on the side of your house, and that is what goes directly into your power of your house. So that's when things get started, and that's either going to feed your house, or if your house no longer needs any extra power, then it will feed it back into the grid. Now this is just on the left hand side here, you see the overall consumption of how many kilowatt hours I've used over the past 12 months. So you can see that typically the winters here are always a little bit more aggressive when it comes to power usage, because the heating that we have is all electric here. We don't have gas or oil or anything else. It's all electric. So we have to run our heat pump through the wintertime. The heat pump is fairly efficient. However, it is always running, especially at nighttime when temperatures do drop below 40s. Heat pumps don't tend to be very efficient when it gets to a certain cold temperature. Then they have a tendency of having to overexert themselves in order to create the extra heat. And then you also have heating strips inside of your ventilation system that will kick on in the event that the heat pump cannot produce enough power. So that's why usually our bills in the wintertime are a little higher than in the summertime. To give you an average of my 12 months last year, we used 7,890 kilowatt hours. That is for the year, if you add up all 12 months. If you broke that down average per day, it's 21.61, which, take that as you will, every month is different, so it's hard to say that I use 21 kilowatt hours a day. That's not quite accurate, but it kind of gives you an idea of what we use. Now on the right hand side, you'll see the production estimates. Now this is what is given to you when you start to look at solar. When you get a company involved, they're going to give you a picture of your house with the solar panels, where they're located, and they're going to give it to you in the best potential scenario for producing the most amount of electricity possible. And we'll go over that in a little bit as well. But these are just the estimates. Now, if you can compare the estimates, you'll notice that right away you're not covering every single month fully. And some months you're producing more, and other months you're producing less. And this is how they have to give sort of an average of how much power over the course of 12 months are you going to be producing and saving and potentially getting money back for. So they try to give you an estimate of how much your monthly electricity bills will be covered, whether that be 60%, 70%, 80%, 90%. That's all kind of factored in, and they try to give you the best possible estimate. But every month will differ based on weather patterns and everything else. So that's a very lenient way of looking at it. But based on these estimates, you'll see that I should be producing about 7,174 kilowatt hours per year. And if you take that number and divide that by my 12 months of consumption, you'll see that covers about 91%. So that technically means 91% of my electricity bill should be covered by these panels. And of course I put the average there per day, 19.65, so I'd be producing about 2 kilowatt hours less than what I would be using. Once again, not an accurate representation, because some months you'll be producing more than you would use, and other months you'll be producing less than what you use. So that will continue to fluctuate as the time goes on. Like I was saying before, we only have about 25 days of production for July. The panels didn't get turned on until about July 7th. So this is just kind of an estimate, first month look at how things are. Now, I produced in the first month 692.6 kilowatt hours. That's pretty good. Now, they estimated that for the month of July, I would be producing 709 kilowatt hours. Now, keep in mind that I'm missing 6 days. So if you take that average of 6 days and add it to that production, I'd be way over. I'd probably be over 800 kilowatt hours. So I would be making more than what they estimated based on that paperwork that they initially gave me. Okay, so now moving on to the next page here. So on the far left, you see the month of July. Now that shows the graph for every single day of production for power. And what that basically shows you is that not every day is the same. Obviously, depending on your weather, clouds, rain, everything is going to change. So that just shows you how unstable that could be just over the course of that 25 days. Now you'll see that little blip on the 3rd. That was actually the day that they turned it on to test it to make sure it was good, and then they turned it back off again because they're not allowed to keep it on until the inspection was done. So until the inspection was done, which was the 7th, that's when they flipped everything on, and then that's when we started producing power. The middle one there, it shows energy produced. So that was the best day that we had in the month of July, and as you can see, it is a pretty perfect increase into a peak, and then down as the sun was starting to set. So that is a perfect day right there, or as perfect as you could pretty much get, especially for the month of July. All the way over to the right, you'll see that the lowest production day I had in July, which 12.7 kilowatt hours. We had some rain. As you can see, the day started okay. It started getting a little bit higher. We had some cloud coverage moving in. We had some dips, and then it never quite got to a peak. And then we had a huge divot right around that 1 o'clock mark, which is basically when the clouds moved in, the rain started, and it was pretty much raining up until about 5:30, 6 o'clock, as you can see there. So that is something to expect as well. If you have rainy days quite often, then solar is one of those things that might just not work for you in that situation, because this can really throw off your numbers. It's almost 1/3 of my best production day for July. So always something to keep in mind, that you can't expect the highest numbers every day. Not every day is going to be perfect. Moving on to the next slide here. Now, the excess production. What happens to electricity that you make that is beyond your needs at that moment in time? There's a couple different ways that electricity companies count that excess production. Now, I'm going to go over the two that are the most common. There may be other ones depending, but I'm not 100% sure of that. But the first one is what they call net metering. Now, this is one that, once again, you would have to do research on your particular electricity company before you make this decision, because this can sway you depending on how this sounds. But basically what net metering is energy produced by the solar that goes back to the grid, you get a credit for, and it's a straight 1-to-1 credit. You get credited for that electricity because you made it and you sent it back to the grid. And then when you're no longer producing solar and you're now taking back from the grid again, that basically becomes a credit that you can use. So basically at nighttime, any electricity that you produced during the day, you can use at night as a credit. Even though you're pulling it from the grid, you could still use it for yourself and not be charged the grid rates for it. The way you can look at it is the grid acts like a battery almost. So it's almost like you're taking your power and you're backing it up to this battery system that you're going to use at night. That's kind of the idea. However, you're not having the actual physical battery, you're just expecting the grid to give it back to you at night. For lack of a better term, the sell back way of doing things, which this is the category that I am in this situation with my electricity company. So energy produced by solar gets sold back at the utility at a predetermined rate. So they basically make up a rate and they say, anything you sell back, we will give you this much back for every kilowatt hour that you send back. And then that's credited to you on your bill. So that's what technically lowers your bill, is the excess production that you make. Energy that you produce immediately is what you use in your home. Anything that's excess is sold back, but it can be at a lower rate than what you would normally be charged. if you were to use that electricity. We'll get more into that shortly. So at nighttime, you would basically be charged the normal electricity rates that everybody else would be getting charged. However, when you sold back to them during the day, you may not be getting the same price. Now, this is an example of my electricity prices where I live. So we don't have on-peak, off-peak times or days. We actually have on-peak, off-peak seasons. So here our on-peak is June through September, and that is at a cost of about 12 cents per kilowatt hour, just below 12 cents per kilowatt hour. Then we have an off-peak season of October through May, and that is about 10 cents per kilowatt hour, just below. Here's where things get a little weird, and this is what I was pointing out before. Our on-peak sellback rate for solar, so when you produce excess solar and you go to send back to the electricity company, I, in my situation, am only getting a little over 4 cents per kilowatt hour, so almost a third. It's only 34% during the months of June through September, which is the on-peak. Off-peak, I'm getting just below 4 cents per kilowatt hour, which is only about 38%. So there goes some of your thoughts, I'm sure, is, well, why am I getting less for the same product? And we'll go over a little bit more of that in just a second here, but yes, I understand your thoughts there. This is why it's very important to do your research before you jump into this type of situation, because you may be expecting to get a full credit back for your electricity. However, that may not always be the case. So let's keep moving on here. Now, this is the thing everybody wants to see, is how much does it cost? How much does this solar system cost? So here it is. Here's the numbers. My system costed $21,038. That was the total cost of the system. Now, that included everything. That included the panels, the labor, that included permits, that included the electricians to come out to the house to hook up all of this stuff. This was everything said and done. There was not a penny more than that. Now, our electricity company was offering a rebate at that time. It was up to $7,200 off the cost of your solar system. The bigger the system, the bigger the rebate, up to $7,200. So it only went up to $7,200. Anything more that you did, you would have to pay out of pocket for the rest. So based on the size of my system, I got a rebate of $6,890 that came right off the top of the cost. So I never even saw that $6,900 that I could have been paying for. So that immediately brings down the cost of my solar to $14,147. Now that's a pretty good decrease right there. So that looks pretty decent. Now, there's a federal tax credit in the year of 2020. Now, this will change next year and the year after. So right now, if you're looking to do solar, try to do it this year if everything looks good. But right now, the federal tax credit is 26%, which means they'll take 26% of what your out-of-pocket cost was. So for me, that would be the $14,147, which makes $3,678 of federal tax credit on my taxes next year. So remember, that's not right off the bat. That's when you file your taxes. Now, every state is different for the state tax credit. Some states offer it, some states don't. Some states offer different percentages, so you have to look into that. The state of South Carolina, where I live, offers one of the best and highest state tax credits at 25%. So that means that $3,536 came off of that total cost, and I will get that back in my tax refund next year as well. However, for this state, it's not all at once. They do break it down over the course of multiple years. So I won't see that all next year, but I'll see that over the course of the next few years on my tax return. So now, my out-of-pocket expenses after rebates, $6,932. That is technically the entire cost of my solar system, $6,932.15. That's looking pretty good, I'm sure. However, it gets a little bit more complicated. So what they estimate my amount saved per year on electricity is $825 per year. That's what they say that I'm going to save based on my previous year and the size of the system that I put in. So if you do that math, it comes out that I would recoup all of my money based on the rebate from the utility company, based on the tax credits, and based off of how much money I'd be saving just in electricity costs every year. 8.4 years is what I would see the turnaround of making the money back again. So when you think about it, that's not so bad, right? Well, it gets a little bit more complicated than that. You may remember me before telling you that when you sell back electricity, you don't get the full rate. So you have to think about how that kind of comes into play as well, but we'll go more into that shortly. Moving on to the next slide, it gets a little more complicated. So I had to finance the panels. Now I financed it through the electricity company. They actually do financing. Now it's only 1.25%, 1.25% interest on a 10-year loan through them for that $14,000. Remembering that the tax credits don't come off that number because I didn't get that money back until next year. So based off of that number, in 10 years, my interest would be $909, so almost $910. So really my out-of-pocket expenses is $15,057.22, and then if you take the tax rebates back, the federal and the state, it's really the $7,842, not the $6,900 that we saw before. So that technically means that it's going to take me about 9.5 years to recoup all my money based off of how much I'm saving on electricity. So still not so bad, right? Well, it gets a little bit more complicated than that. So let's move on here. Now, here's a thing that you definitely have to look into in your place. Now, this is the unexpected. Now, I was aware of this when I was signing the paperwork. This was something I was not aware of until I sat down and read the contracts and the paperwork. Now, you have to verify this with your electricity company before you do this. Now, there's what they call a standby fee. Now, this standby fee is basically like a maintenance fee, if you will, that the electricity company charges you. And that is $4.40 per kilowatt hour that you have on your system. So for my system, it's 5.92 kilowatt hours. Multiply that by $4.40 per month. And then there's also a metering charge. They charge you for the meter that goes on your house that transfers electricity to and from. There's also a $2 a month metering fee on top of that. So between the standby fee and the metering charge, there's actually $28 a month more in fees that I have to pay just because I'm solar. Everybody else that does not have solar doesn't pay for these fees. And the way they explain it is that if you're basically not paying for an electricity bill every month, then all the maintenance for the lines that have to come to your area or your house is still got to be paid. So you're technically not paying for that. I disagree with that. I don't believe that's the proper way of handling this situation, but this is something that I have to deal with, at least for the time being. Hopefully this is something that could be changed in the future. If you multiply that by a year, that's $336 a year extra that you're putting out because you're solar. So really, you're not saving $825 a year in your electricity costs. It's really about $488 a year in your electricity costs. So if you divide that by your out-of-pocket expenses, which for me is the $7,842, it's really going to take me about 16 years to get back the total cost of my solar system. Now, I know what you're thinking. It sounds horrible. It sounds pointless. It sounds absolutely stupid for you to go out there and do solar because they're taking advantage of you. And let's go over some of those right now. Here's the good. You're doing something good for the environment. You are taking extra emissions out of the atmosphere. You're doing something by utilizing your house, your property, to create renewable energy that can be used for not only you, but for the grid. And What I mean by the grid is that you're actually helping stabilizing that grid. So in peak seasons like the middle of the summertime, when you have everybody running their air conditioning and overloading that grid, instead of you having the issue of your grid being overloaded because of that, everybody in your area that has solar and is giving back to that grid is actually stabilizing it, meaning that it's putting less pressure on not only the facility that has to create the electricity, but all the stations that are between there and your house. So everybody in your area that has solar is helping stabilize the load of that demand of everybody wanting to use their air conditionings all at once. So it does help that area. It can decrease the amount of power outages in your area just because 20 or 30 or 40 houses have solar on them. So keep that in mind. It also helps with that. Now, the rebates and tax incentives can help pay for most of the cost. So if you're paying out of pocket for this, it absolutely does not make any sense whatsoever. But if you do your research, you can find rebates and incentives to help with the cost of this. So definitely look into those before you make the decision to go solar. You can increase the value of your home with solar. Solar is something that people are interested in and people want, but people don't always want to do the upfront cost. So people who buy houses technically can prefer solar. I think that can go either way, but they always say that it can increase the cost of your house. It really depends. Financing is good. There's a lot of good banks, or even in my case, the electricity company themselves can help finance at very low interest rates. Much better than paying 3% or 4% or 5%. The 1.25 that I am paying, I don't really mind all that much. It's pretty cheap rate, so I'm okay with that. And the other thing you gotta look at is free electricity. You really are making electricity for yourself at no cost. It's a pretty cool concept when you think of it, when you look at your phone and you see that you're producing electricity and you're actually producing so much that you're sending back to that grid. That is a pretty cool thing when you think about it. Moving on to the bad. So once again, it's expensive if you don't have any type of financial assistance with it. And like I said, you almost would never want to do this unless you absolutely had some sort of like financing, or if you have the tax incentive rebates, and sometimes your utility has those rebates like mine did. That is definitely something to consider well before you decide to do solar. It could be an eyesore depending on where the panels most likely would need to go. You may not like them. Your roof may look horrible with them. I've seen some pretty terrible installations where you may have 3 or 4 panels vertically and then a couple of panels horizontally underneath of it. I've seen them where they've skipped over satellite dishes because they just had to keep a gap there, and I think that just looks awful when you have 3 panels, a satellite dish, and then 2 more panels. Like, I just think that is just an awful way of doing things. So make sure when they show you the plans of what your house is going to look like, that you actually like the way it looks. I completely changed my plans. When they showed me the plans for my house, they were going to put a dozen solar panels right on the part of my roof that faces towards the road. And I said, no, I don't like the way this looks. Even though I had the nicer panels, I still preferred to have the panels where they weren't going to be an eyesore for people coming down the street. So I definitely changed the position of that. At a little bit of a cost, I did probably take a little bit of a hit in my production by doing it this way, but overall, the curb appeal looks much better. The other thing a lot of people don't realize, you usually should put your panels on a new roof. And here's the biggest reason why. If your roof is within, let's say 10 years, depending on where you live, depending on how long roofs last in your area, solar panels are designed to last at least 25 years. Most of them have a 25-year warranty on them. So a lot of times, the panels will last about the same, if not longer than your roof. And here's the issue. If you put solar panels on an old roof and then have to change that roof out in 10 years, the amount of cost that it's going to take for you to take the panels off of the roof and put them back on the roof, it's going to completely eat into your savings of the solar panels. So you don't want to do solar panels on an old roof or even a roof that's just not in great shape. You want to do it on the new roof. I had put a new roof on in March, so this was perfect timing for me. My roof has a 25-year warranty. My panels have a 25-year warranty. It's going to work. It could cost thousands of dollars to take panels off of a roof and put them back on. That is going to completely destroy your bottom line when it comes to your savings doing solar. The unexpected. And once again, this is you having to do the research before you decide to do this. You aren't always selling back at the normal rate. If you're buying electricity at 12 cents per kilowatt hour, that doesn't mean that you're selling it for 12 cents per kilowatt hour. So you have to make sure you're doing that. Now, if you're on a net metering plan in your area and your electricity company does net metering, you're probably better off. But if you're selling it back, make sure it's worth it. If it's less than a third like me, it is probably going to be a difficult conversation to figure out how much money you're really going to be saving if you're selling it back all the time. We'll go over that in a little bit as well. Extra monthly fees, as I showed you before, standby fee. That eats into it as well. That is an extra $20-something, $28 a month that I have to put out just because I'm a solar customer. That is a pretty steep price to pay, and it does eat into that cost of what I'm saving. Now, I don't have my first bill yet. I should have it soon, and I will try to get that at the end of this, and I will show you exactly what my breakdown is for my bill. And then we'll kind of go over how much I saved just in that 25 days that I had solar. It could take you years to get your money back. This is a long-term investment. This is not something where you're going to put up your solar panels and then in a couple of years you're going to have your money back and everything is profit after that. As I showed you, it could take a decade, if not longer, before you pay off your panels, before you actually start producing just as a pure profit at that point. And another thing people don't realize is solar panels lose about 1% production every year. As they sit outside and as they get hit by that sun all the time, they do lose some efficiency. They lose about 1% a year. Now, most panels will have a warranty based on that efficiency, so if it drops below a certain amount, they will actually warranty that panel. Once again, doing your research prior to choosing your panels. A lot of times, that can make the difference when you choose your panels. Even though they may have a panel that has a 30-year warranty, that warranty may not be very good. If you get a panel with a 25-year warranty, that may have a better warranty coverage. So once again, doing that due diligence of looking into it and making sure you choose the right panel. Not necessarily just based off of looks or price, but definitely want to make sure that the warranty is something that they're going to stand behind if there's something wrong with the panel. Keep in mind as well, make sure that when you put your panels up, if you go with a company that is covering the cost of the warranty replacement as well. So yeah, maybe the panel's covered, but maybe it's going to cost you $200 or $300 for them to replace that panel. That is something you got to think about as well. So make sure that you have that discussion with the company that's going to install it for you. Now, a couple things I wanted to go over was what we discussed before about when you're selling it back at a lower rate than what it would cost you to use it. Now, if you're in a situation like myself where you have those stipulations where you sell it back cheaper, it is more beneficial to you to use the electricity than it is for you to sell it back. And here's an example why. If you use your electricity during the day when your sun is producing power for your house, if you use that power to your advantage, you'll be saving more money on your electricity bill as opposed to trying to recoup the money by sending it back. So here's an example of that. Run your dishwasher during the day. Don't run it at night. If you run it during the day, the cost of you running that dishwasher is now going to be pretty much nothing because the solar panels will pay for that as opposed to you selling back that excess electricity. If you run your dishwasher at night, you're going to be charged at whatever rate, 12 cents per kilowatt hour, let's say. If you run it during the day, it's practically free if the sun is strong enough to offset the cost of that dishwasher. Same goes for other appliances. Your washer and dryer, more or less your dryer, especially if you have an electric dryer, they take a lot of power. That is something you probably want to start doing during the day. That is going to save you a lot of money. Pretty much anything that is a 220 appliance is best to do during the day. If you're going to do some baking and you're going to use the oven, maybe start doing that stuff during the day when you're producing the power and using it. Another thing to think about is your thermostat. So your AC costs can be significant in the middle of the summer, and that is due to the fact that it can run a lot in the middle of the day. However, if it's running a lot in the middle of the day, it's not going to be costing you as much. Now, take this as an example. If you lower your air conditioning temperature, let's say that you have your air conditioning set for 82 degrees during the day while you're not home because you're at work, right? But when you come home from work, you crank that down to 75. Now that 7 degrees may take hours for it to finally get down to that temperature. However, at that time of the day, when the sun is coming down, you're not producing as much power. Eventually, once the sun's completely down, you're not producing any power. And if your air conditioning is still trying to keep up with the demand that you asked, you're now using electricity from the grid that's costing you money. However, if you keep your temperature lower during the day, let's say you keep it at 78 degrees during the day, your air conditioning is going to run, but it's going to be offset by the solar that you create, which means that, yeah, you won't be sending as much back to the grid. However, you'll be saving money because most of the cost will be offset by your solar. And when you get home and lower it a couple more degrees, it won't take as long, and therefore your solar will continue to offset the cost until eventually the sun goes down and hopefully your temperature is already at what you asked it to be at. So keep that stuff in mind when you go solar, if you're in the same situation I am. If you're sending it back and you're only getting a piece of it, might as well use it instead. Well, everybody, I hope that helped you out. If you're interested in solar, or if you already did solar and you wanted to have a little bit of a comparison to what I do, keep in mind that if this is something that interests you, hit that subscribe button. I'll be doing more videos on solar in the future, so this way you can follow with me and we'll go over stuff like this again. I will be doing a battery in the near future. Don't know if it's going to be this year or possibly next year. The tax incentives are better this year, so I might be trying to squeeze that in before the end of the year. But if this is something that interests you, hit that subscribe button. If you enjoyed the material, hit the like button, give me a thumbs up. And don't forget to hit the bell for notifications for future videos of mine. I do appreciate you watching the video today. And just remember, welcome to the future, welcome to Tech Motoring, and we'll see you on the next episode.